How's everybody's conference so far? ASU+GSV, anybody first time at the conference? That's pretty good. Anybody, I think it's the 7 years, is that right? So anybody been here 7 years in a row? Oh my gosh, 6 years in a row, 5 years in a row, 4 years in a row, 3, 2, 1. Most of us are new. That's very cool. I was told 7,000 people are here this week, and 6 years ago it was 50 people. So that's pretty cool. So welcome. I'm Jenny Dearborn. I have been asked to moderate this amazing panel of folks. It's kind of like one of these things is not like the other, and that's me. So I've been a 5-time chief learning officer in companies. So let's see. Hewlett-Packard, Sun Microsystems, Oracle, SuccessFactors, SAP, and a couple other things, and a chief talent officer and a chief people officer. And these amazing humans are all entrepreneurs in the learning technology space that have created amazing companies that sell their stuff to me, right? So I'm a buyer, and these guys are entrepreneurs. So that's why I'm moderating this panel. So why don't we go down and do introductions, and then we'll get started.
I'm Ulrik Christensen. I'm the CEO of Area 9. We make infrastructure for modern kinds of learning and publishing platforms from you can read until you retire.
Hello, I'm Julia Stiglitz. I'm the CEO and co-founder of CoRise. We are an AI-driven edtech platform helping individuals and companies in really dynamic skill areas like AI and data.
David Blake, nice to be with you all. I'm the CEO of 2 startups right now. So one is Book Club, and we run leadership development book clubs for corporates, and Degreed, which created the LXP category.
Hi everyone, I'm Joy. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Antwalk. We are a live learning for enterprises.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Scott Kinney, Chairman and CEO of NovoEd. We're a collaborative and social learning technology platform for enterprises, human learning at scale.
Very cool. Thanks, everybody. So we're here to talk about mastery-based learning. So if we could just sort of level set with a definition. What is mastery-based learning? What is it not? How is it different than other things? Anybody want to jump in?
Sure. So I got a significant book contract to answer that question.
Oh, excellent.
Together with Tony Wagner, and
Can you give
we were struggling about it for about a year and a half until his wife suggested that maybe learning that matters would be a great way to describe it. And the more we thought about it, the easier it was to describe it that way, because mastery-based learning has roots way back. But what is important is, for a long time we had a working hypothesis was learning that works, meaning that you can actually do something with it, that it's at a point where you trust your carpenter to build your roof, kind of mastery. Not mastery in the sense of, at least not the way I prefer to use it, mastery, winning the world championships mastery. So in some ways, the more we thought about learning that matters, it really resonated with us. Because it matters what you're doing, how you're doing, and that it actually leads you to what you and the people around you need.
Okay, anybody want to add to that? Mastery-based learning?
Yes, so I think the way we look at it today is that with the advent of the creator-based economy, today there are a lot of the new people who have walked a certain path are now available as masters to teach others. And that's the fundamental shift that's happening. In the last 15, 20 years, there were trainers who were full-time trainers who would take most of the learning courses. But today, with more and more operators coming in to this creator economy and adding their experience and expertise to the equation, is what is creating this new wave of mastery-based learning from people whom you can actually relate to, rather than just a trainer that your HR or L&D has signed up for. So I think that's the change, and that's the precise thing that I'm seeing in the industry now.
The other thing that I think about with mastery-based learning is a shift from what we say is learning, but actually is just teaching, to what actually is learning. And so we spend so much time talking at people or teaching, but you don't know if anybody actually learned anything or if they're taking anything away from it, or perhaps more importantly, did they apply it back to the job after they finished it? And when I think about mastery-based learning and what's important, it's that did they actually learn something? And then, even further than that, did they apply it in a way that's meaningful to their career or to their organization?
Okay, that's super helpful. So it's not learning for the sake of learning. It's not like, I'm just so curious about this, but it's like, how do I apply it?
Or, it's not just listening, and, who knows whether someone got anything from that.
Okay.
Just one thing to add also, we're all corporate and workforce focused, but the ability to really create human learning that matters is not just a adult workforce opportunity. Higher ed, K-12, these are concepts that if we use the right processes, the right technologies, have tremendous application through the entire spectrum of education and learning.
Okay.
Yeah, and just one addition to that, like many people in the room might be familiar with Bloom's 2 Sigma problem that came out in the 80s, which basically looked at 3 different groups. There was a conventional classroom. It was in K-12 education, but there was a conventional classroom. There was the classroom that used a mastery-based approach, so actually making sure that students were actually learning it. And then there was the third group was mastery-based learning, but with a one-on-one tutor. And what they saw was actually a 2 standard deviation improvement in outcomes when you had mastery-based learning and you had one-on-one tutoring. And so, and then a 1 standard deviation improvement was just mastery-based learning. And so I think that speaks to, the potential impact of mastery-based learning and personalization, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, so that's a fantastic segue. So we have been talking about this as an industry since the 80s. Since that original research was really a breakthrough. So what's new now? Like what's different with mastery-based learning from what we knew when it was first sort of introduced? David, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. We did some research. It's now about 2 years old. Did it with Harvard Business Publishing. But curiosity actually now negatively correlates with positive enterprise learning cultures.
That is a shock. Say more.
And here's why. And this is what's changed, which is the world of education and learning and information used to be inaccessible and scarce. And in that environment, the attribute that you need to have to be a good learner is curiosity. Because when information and education is inaccessible and scarce, you have to have a drive, you have to have an engine that's going to keep you going at it. But the shift in the world is that the line's crossed, and now education and information is abundant, free, democratized. And so what curiosity gets you now is down a Reddit rabbit hole. And the things that actually correlate with good enterprise learning organizations now all tend to correlate with intentionality. And I think there's another shift that's been happening in the world, which is, so as those lines crossed, information and education went from being inaccessible and scarce to abundant, free, and sort of on-demand, democratized. And, as that shift occurred, what first happened was learning is hard. We're confronting all this like democratization, the MOOCs, the Khan Academy, Code Academy. Learning is hard, we made it small. And so the last decade was this trend of micro-learning. Atomic units, go from degree to course, go from course to module. Micro-credentials. We were trying to make everything small because learning is really hard. It's really, really hard. And so we spent 10 years, learning is hard, let's make it small. Learning is hard in the flow of work. And the thing is we spent 10 years and we now have innovated and solved for a lot of that. And now what we're confronted with is learning is hard. We got the continuous agile learning stuff figured out, and it's allowed the market now to mature into the harder problem of mastery, but in this new age context. So we're in a world where information is democratized, it's largely free, it's accessible, we've figured out micro-learning, and now it's time for mastery. I can watch a YouTube video from the world's best marathon runners, I get smarter, but it doesn't turn me into a marathon runner, and that is essentially where the market is at, which is, okay, I've given all of my employees the marathon training video, but now it's time for the harder problem of actually turning my employees into marathon runners. And that's a journey that is much harder, it's multifaceted, it requires human intervention, it requires scaffolding, it's asynchronous, it's synchronous, it tends to be more expensive. I think that's where the world's at right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll actually add to what David is saying, absolutely right. It breaks down to one more level. So if you look at the value chain of learning, there is, as David was rightly saying, there's a lot of it is facts, just simple facts, and there is abundance of that. Let's take, in the context of enterprise, let's say somebody trying to sell predictive healthcare. Right? Everybody know the fact is, as human beings, we all want to be healthy. But then comes experience. The experienced sales guy will actually teach you that humans don't do anything about it. Still, if you look at the fast food giants are much bigger companies than any preventive healthcare companies, right? So that's where experience comes. And then the third thing what comes together is expertise of, so what do I do about it? And that third part is becoming very, very important in mastery-based learning, where somebody who has walked the same trail may not have all the answers, but today is actually coming and coaching the next generation of people, at least to say, okay, here are the 8 out of 10 things that are not going to work, and here is 2 out of 10 that you can try and this may work. And that last level of, like you were giving the example of being a marathon runner, a runner who would have done that for 10, 15 years would first come and clean all the basics for you, and this is not going to work. And then they are going to work with you to say, hey, try these 2 or 3 things in your context that might make you a good runner. And that shift from fact to experience to expertise is where the entire this mastery-based learning, which ties back to doing something in real life, is coming together.
Yeah, please.
To David's point about what this progression we've been through, where we tried to cut everything down to some small discrete components. The natural reaction that probably leads to this now is that now that we know that everybody can find a video on YouTube, either on marathon runner or how to do brain surgery on your kid. Like we have some pretty obvious situations where we would never allow somebody to operate on our kids unless we knew that they were able to do it. I have a background in medicine, full disclosure, and I got interested in education because we could see how healthcare professionals were messing things up. I think what is important about this is that when we are to move and when it becomes more and more transparent, that it's just not enough to have this enormous amount of useless information or useless so-called learning. One of the things that becomes a reality is that in the past, even in healthcare, we've made that mistake to make the conclusion that because you participate in education meant you accomplished mastery. Of course you didn't. It's 9 years ago. I sent a picture from a difficult airway management course run by one of the best guys in the world. He was responsible for the organization, and one of the guys was sleeping. Like, obviously, an anesthesiologist probably, or ICU doc being there, but he was sleeping. Of course he wasn't learning anything. At the end of the course, he would probably get a certificate. That's not the future anymore. We will change. And one of the areas that I've been after trying to figure out is, can we find Petri dishes where we can extract the effective ingredient? And I found recently, about 2 years ago, I found that cave divers are the craziest ones. Why? Why would cave divers be the craziest ones? You find some of it with astronauts, with fighter pilots, top performing military teams. But the cave divers are the most extreme. They're also the ones where they die if somebody on the team makes a mistake. So that means that they're deeply invested. It's like the chicken and the pig kind of breakfast. If anybody ever heard that joke, I won't go into it. Oh, yeah. One of them is fully invested, the other one is not. But the cave divers are so passionate about education because it's the entire culture that is, we all die if we're not prepared to handle things for real. And I think that this wave of changes, to David's point, is because we've been through an unhealthy part of democratization of education, But it has opened up a lot of eyes towards what were actually the gaps, and I think that's why we're getting to it actually needs to work. I want a surgeon who has done it before, not the one who just got his license reinstated.
Yeah, it's always been true that mastery of these soft skills, which is hard, that's kind of the irony, the softer the skill, the harder it is to master, has required a lot of repetition and practice and human-to-human interaction, lots of feedback from your fellow learners. And I think what's new is that the tools and technology and content that have been created in the last 10 years have been incredibly helpful in helping people master the harder skills that are non-ambiguous and where there's structure and rules and established methods and processes. As you get to those higher order ones, though, and by the way, I think those tools are about to get 10 times better. And so I think that's great for acquisition and mastery of those skills, but it makes the human interaction part of mastering the ambiguous skills, the ones that have less structure and fewer rules, even more important. We can use generative AI as an enabler of those processes, but not as a replacement for the interaction with your fellow learners and learning from them and the trial and error and all the mistakes that we've made in 30 years of work.
The one disagreement I would have is I don't think we democratized education in the sort of first wave of ed tech. I think we democratized content, and we put it out there as like, this is learning, which it's not. Kind of coming back to like the beginning of this conversation, it was content. Teaching, learning is something different. I think about it. I started my career as a Teach for America teacher in East San Jose, and 80% of what I did was, inspire and motivate my students and give them feedback when they got something wrong and help them understand why they got something wrong and, get them back on the right track. And you can't do that with, just content. And so what's happening now, in some ways, isn't new. It's actually going back to what we already knew is really good teaching and learning. What's new is the technological capabilities for being able to sort of automate and scale what we already knew was really great teaching and learning, but that we couldn't scale that before because so much of it was effectively services. And with what's happening with generative AI and a lot of the advances that have happened, over the last 6 months, so super recently, I think we can begin to sort of automate that, and I think that's going to really change the game.
Yeah. So Joy, last comment, and then I want to build on that.
Yeah, and this is so important. Let me give you an example of what Scott was saying, that the human-centric interactions are very important. Let me give you a very social example. Every time somebody comes and says, hey, I'm getting engaged, or I got married, or I'm having a kid, the normal response is saying, congratulations, right? We all do that. Think of a world where every married person and somebody comes and said, I'm getting married, I say, oh shit. Just think about it. Just by doing that one change in how we respond to that, the whole human behavior will change. So what I have realized is when you go deep into data, then you understand that when you are listening to somebody whom you can relate to, then it's not just about knowledge, but your propensity to act on that significantly increases. Irrespective of the fact that whether it was right or wrong. The marriage data still remains the same, whatever it is today. But if every guy, instead of saying, every married person, instead of saying congratulations, start to say something, oh, whatever, the whole way it will change in terms of what is your propensity to act on it. So what I've realized when I'm looking into the more granular data is that human beings not only learn, but they are much more likely to act when they have actually heard the same thing from someone they can relate to.
Please.
There's a story last night. So CoRise hosted a dinner last night, and I met the learning leader from Noom. I don't see her in here, so I'm gonna tell her story and maybe tell it poorly here. But in enterprise learning, it's just been so hard to get to mastery. We tend to measure completion data, engagement data, or even satisfaction data, but it's been just really hard to get to measuring mastery in scaled enterprise organizations. But she talked about, she sort of like refuses to play the game. And she gave me several stories. I will give you one. But so she showed up, the organization had done its info security training enterprise-wide the year prior. And then IT, part of their security program was IT sends out the phishing you get the outside-in phishing emails, but then the IT department sends its own phishing emails inside the organization to see who is clicking on the phishing emails. Everyone, I'm seeing nodding heads. So yeah, I've clicked on a couple of these. All right, so they did the enterprise-wide training. IT sends the phishing emails, and the click-through rate on the phishing emails, the internal ones, was 25%. And so she joins the company in the interim. It comes time to do the annual info security training again, and she said, I refuse. And what she did instead was she had a little contest across the organization to submit stories if you or someone you knew had been sort of a victim of online fraud. And so everyone submitted their stories, and then they sort of, got to the top 3 and then the top 1 story, and they had that person tell their story, video production, sent that story out across the organization with a couple of principles. And it was all about how that person's mom online had gotten engaged, scammer, had, they deposit a little something in your bank account, I need it returned, 10, it was money gone out the door, life savings. Tell that story across the organization. They did no assessment, interestingly, 0. No one checked any box. There was no SCORM. It was not in the LMS. And then she had the IT department 2 months later do the internal phishing emails. The click-through rate was 0.02%. An organization went from 25% to 0.02%. And I think it goes to this point, which is, and I hate quoting Zuckerberg these days, but I'm going to do it. This is an old Zuckerberg quote, which is, we tend to care more about the squirrel in our front yard than the dying child halfway across the world. Something to that effect. Which is, humans, I think we've all lived through this like COVID experiment, which has sort of betrayed just how weird our brains are. Just how much proximity sort of matters. What a difference it is if you have met that person once and shaken hands, and then the relationship begins versus you've never met. I mean, there's just, the human aspect of it matters. Have someone inside your company tell their story, and mastery happened. Run people through a course and an assessment, mastery didn't happen. I think it really reinforces the point.
I just wanted to add that when I was Chief Learning Officer at SAP, we ran an internal research on the factors that led to your level 1 evaluation score. So training program and you get a level 1 score. Well, what really drives that? And it turned out it was the temperature of the room, the quality of the catering, and how funny was the instructor. So if you are ever saying, but boss, this is an amazing program because I got a 4.5 out of 5 stars, shame on you, because it means nothing. Those vanity metrics mean nothing. Looked like somebody was about to say, Julie.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I love about that story is like, what does mastery mean in a corporate context? It doesn't mean that even an assessment, like that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It means, what it means is that you applied it back to your job in a way that moved the company forward. And yeah, I think that's a shift in terms of how we think about learning.
So the original version of mastery actually goes way further back. That was a trend, particularly in Northern Europe, I think, where it originated, where a way a carpenter gets educated is learning from another master carpenter, and it was very tangible, the results that came out of it. We recently worked with one of our large clients in the corporate space, and they had put together a mentoring program, and they were sending out a request for who wanted to volunteer as mentors. Great, more than 1,000 people volunteered to be mentors. Very large company. They send out the same offer now to people to become mentees. How many people volunteered? Less than 1 per 10 mentors. So there is an interesting dynamic in the corporate space where it's like this thing where you actually learn from somebody more experienced, a role model. We don't have that tradition in the same way as you have if you look at the master plumber or the master carpenter that constantly educates the next tier in their trade. And we've turned it into something where it has to be a very academic approach to be fine enough. Where I actually think there's so much to learn from this. If you look at the best sports people, the best musicians, in many other professions, it actually still works with a classic mastery-based system. So I think we have a lot to learn in the more traditional workforce space.
Can I ask another question? So what is the relationship between mastery-based learning and career mobility? How can we make mastery-based learning in a corporate setting even more practical, where it really advances people's careers? How can we build that into our corporate learning structure? Any thoughts, David?
Yes.
Can you elaborate?
I thought you did a great job.
Never ask David to elaborate on something.
Can you elaborate succinctly? No. Yes.
No, I thought you did a great job. You know, you have to turn them into a marathon runner. Like, if you actually are going to have people transfer and switch jobs, you know, and so I think a lot's been happening on that front. The internal mobility platforms are now in kind of their, I don't know, 5th, 7th kind of real year of maturity. I think it's a frontier that a lot of organizations have pushing against. And I'd say the frontier sitting behind that is, you know, we've got this frontier of knowing. I mean, it's sort of the other side of mastery. What have you mastered? What skills do you have, and at what level? Versus what are the opportunities? What is the need at what level? And that game of matchmaking has been really sort of rudimentary, and we're solving it by degrees. It's not like we aren't solving it, you know, and we're going to have to wait till these 4 things get solved before it's going to happen. But I think we're in a moment where it's just like really rudimentary, and the sophistication that's coming, I think, is going to be astronomical in the next 5 years, in part because it's a problem that AI is especially well situated to. Skill taxonomies, at the end of the day, are a language model based on proximity. That's like the inverse statement of what these natural language generative AI models are. And so the sophistication at which we are able to start to ingest, infer, measure, ascertain what your skills are and how it maps back to job posting needs, I think is going to get so sophisticated really fast. Last thought I'll put there is so much so that I think 10 years from now, we will all get paid on what skills we have rather than what job we have. And that's going to be radical. Here and now, I get paid based on my geography and my job role. And truth be told, my gender and some other things is sort of the reality of it. We are not perfect in how we've organized the world and pay, but it's primarily your job role and your geography. But if I'm sitting in the same job, doing the same thing, but I'm upskilling myself at twice the rate, I cannot capture that value until I get a new job role. Job role is the thing that we pay on. That's going to be absurd 5-7 years from now. We're in the same job role, I'm upskilling at twice the rate, I will make more money than you, and that will be the only equitable, fair answer left in the world. And that's going to radically reorganize sort of the corporate human capital.
At the individual level, there is that very clear link between skills acquisition, skills mastery, and career mobility. I'm not convinced, though, that in large organizations that is the unlocking element to it. If you talk to CHROs, CEOs of really big companies, they typically have 2 massive challenges when it comes to people. One is sort of DE&I related. It's attracting, promoting, and retaining a diverse workforce. And the other is career mobility, being able to move people around within their organization, not losing them to outside opportunities or having them stall out within one division. And I think the unlockers of those will only be indirectly related to mastery because there are these structural challenges and barriers in making those things happen. And though I do think, as an optimist, and I am an optimist, that if the senior leaders of these organizations are really understanding the human elements of what it takes to break those barriers down, maybe they'll be able to get there. But at the individual level, I think the link is extremely strong.
Yeah, it's a great point, because what David is saying on my right is that as individuals, the skill-based hierarchy makes sense. On my left, Scott is saying it's difficult in enterprises, and that's precisely what we do at Antwalk. We're actually building a digital people supply chain. This is absolutely right. The problem that you said is that enterprises still don't think of human capital in the form of a supply chain. And they did not have to, because earlier people used to take 2 or 3 jobs in their entire career. The world was more stable. Things were okay. After you graduate, you have a piece of paper, and it's good to go for your life. Now 2 things are changing. One, the skills required are changing every now and then. Plus, the Gen Zs don't want to have a 9-to-5 job like many people in my generation. They want to work for 2 months, then they want to be in the, Mount Everest, and then probably do some skiing in Australia, and then come back. That's a reality. We need to wake up to that reality. So that's the fact is that they're not going to have this whole 9-to-5 job for whatever, years and years after, and they just crave for that one vacation in 2 years. That's not going to happen. So the combination of these 2 external and internal factors, external environment and internal aspirations, is going to actually create a dire need that matches both what David and Scott is saying, that it has to be a skill taxonomy based, and it has to have a supply chain view to the world, which means I get what I need at a point in time when I need it, and I pay for it. And then again, somebody else comes and does the same task and gets paid for it, and then they go and skiing somewhere else. And this supply chain has to be built whether we like it or not, right? One of the reasons, and just one last point I'll add is, one thing I'm actually seeing when this supply chain becomes more and more important is, if you look at our nature of work, there are 2 parts to it, broadly. One is what is obvious, like 1 + 1 = 2. And then everything that we do in our daily life has this idea based on bounded rationality of human beings, which is ambiguous. Like if you say, I'm going to not sell 1-year contract, but I'm going to sell 2-year contract, then very likely the price is not going to be equal to 2-year. Somebody is going to say 1.75, 1.5, 1.8, whatever is going to be a long negotiation or whatever else. This ambiguity and the whole idea of this new generations of people who are coming in with, fraction of second of, attention span, all of this is making the world more and more ambiguous if you are working together with young people today. So ambiguity in people's attention, ambiguity of skills that you require, and that internal ambition of doing something else every 3 months, all these 3 put together will actually lead to a very point in time mastery-based skills. I have skill 1, I put that in a job place, I get X dollars, I go and do something else, I come back, rehash my skills, again get paid, again go do something else. And that's what I see evolving over a period of time.
Anything else on the connection to career mobility in the enterprise?
I think we are missing one really important component, which is the skills engineering that has happened in the past has been driven by some quite questionable parameters, where we've been scanning job ads for keywords to try to figure out what is a job role, what belongs to that job role. But you really probably shouldn't be hiring a surgeon based on that, right? Because what is the number one thing that determines how many lawsuits is, if you're only looking at that as an employer, nowhere in the job ad for that surgeon it would say empathy. So a lot of the things that we are talking about all the time that we're missing, we're not finding that way. But even more when you start to do the skills engineering on these things, we're actually seeing that it's harder than we think. I've been spending the last years trying to figure out how do we do skills engineering on less tangible things than tying a knot or tying your shoelaces, or it's a lot more complex. And there's very little expertise in the world in how to do this. There are some that are trying, but I think it's a highly questionable thing where we are on that maturation curve before it becomes good enough. Some of the new technologies will help, but I don't think they will give us the answers. So I'm sorry to sound like a little bit like a wet blanket here, but I think that's the biggest challenge we have, to be able to do that. If the quality of data, if our metric for when a skill is accomplished or what it is we're looking for, if we don't know how to do that engineering.
Yeah, and another critique that I sort of have of the, going too far down the skills route is just how dynamic these skills are and how rapidly they're changing. So, we have a deep learning course on our platform. We've had to update that course every 3 months for the last year because the skills are changing so rapidly. And that's under the same umbrella of deep learning in the same 4-week class. So you can just imagine, like, at a higher level, how many skills would be changing within each of these fields. Or we have a prompt engineering course that's coming out next month. Like, who was talking about prompt engineering 3 months ago? Now it's this whole area that, so many people are needing to learn. And so I worry, like, when we go too far down the skills route, we start getting sort of lost in the minutia and losing, like, sort of the spirit of the mastery-based learning of, are you actually learning something that's going to contribute to your job in a really meaningful way? And maybe there's some other way to do it that's able to be a lot more dynamic, and maybe there's probably an entrepreneur in this room that's working on that problem that could be a really big problem to solve. But I think making sure not to get lost in a taxonomy and losing the sort of forest in those trees is important as we talk about skills.
Yeah. Quickly, before we run out of time, how do we convince a buyer around this? How do you sell this as a chief learning officer that is has a huge corporate budget and is buying services? Most everybody that approaches me, is selling content libraries still, and is selling a job architecture framework. Is that this the same as what we put together in spreadsheets and Post-it notes on the wall in Hewlett-Packard in '95 when I started? Very few people are talking about mastery-based learning the way you are. And I don't have anybody on my team coming to me and saying, hey, we really need to pivot our entire learning strategy away from volume and away from vanity metrics towards actually assessing whether or not people have mastered a skill and can execute it on the job. So how do you convince a buyer?
So I think that the most effective L&D organizations of the future will have a lot fewer trainers and administrators and instructional designers and a lot more organizational psychologists, technology integrators, and sort of those sets of skills. And maybe it's not even a centralized L&D organization. So I think that it is a challenge to sell these concepts into L&D, because that's not how they've been organized, and that's not how a lot of the partners are coming to them. And so that's, I think, our challenge as well, is how do we talk to you? How do we convince you that these outcomes that you're seeking can go through this non-traditional process to get there, and also one that which your organization is maybe not prepared to deliver.
And I think one of the ways I'm seeing this happening, as Scott rightly said, very, very challenging, but still, I think there are many more integrated conversations that are starting to happen with the function head and the chief learning officer in the same room to say, look, if I'm serving the sales side or customer success side or CIO, whoever, what is it that you look at your organization and then integrate that view with the chief learning officer rather than having two separate fronts fighting that battle.
So I think AI is going to fundamentally shift our skills and jobs landscape at a pace that we have never seen before. And I think learning leaders sit at this incredibly important position between the talent that an organization has and the skills and capabilities that an organization needs for that future. And I think that's going to change the conversation, because it can't just be, it's not a checkbox. It is, what is learning that really works, and what is learning that really works at scale. And so I think that sort of gives rise to a lot of the solutions that are up here.
Okay. Any final? We see we have our clock is ticking down. Final, each one of you, final takeaway that you want folks to know before we close out on this topic.
I think we need to take this a lot more seriously than many corporations have done. So the answer to the previous question would also be, do they even need change? Have they realized they need change? And if not, it's really hard to sell anything.
Yeah.
I'm leaving from here to go do another panel. So y'all are invited if you want to hear any more on the thoughts of skills and where the frontier is. It's going to be the Seaport up on the 32nd floor interview with Josh Burson. But I'm also going to have to haul out of here. So if I blow past any of you, I don't mean to be rude. So, but thank you.
That's your closing thought is
Yeah.
come with
That's I'm selling. It's the first one's free, guys. That one's paid admission. So.
I don't have anything to pitch, but stay optimistic. It beats the alternative, and I think optimists will help us get there.
Not true. They build a great platform. They've been at it for years. Everyone should go give them a look.
Thank you, David.
Okay, questions from the audience? We have just a minute left. Yeah, please.
I'm curious about the distinction between, from your perspective, looking at systems, platforms, mental models, but also enterprise, the difference between the single-player sport, like I am going to become a marathon runner, and I will be for 3 months with you, and versus the challenges we're taking on, the moves we have to make, aren't about the single player, but it's about how they fit within. And so I'm just wondering to what degree, especially if AI says few of you are going to run marathons, it turns out. So I'm wondering, how do you think that level, and I realize that's a one-liner, but I'm curious what you think of it.
Book Club had the insight that there is now 1,000 ways for any one person to learn anything. But if you need a whole organization to go on a learning journey together, there's very, very little in the market. From services, Franklin Covey workshopping, there's just not many options. I think it's a frontier. It's not exactly an answer. A lot of the cohorts we see are intermingled with still consumers, and so it's not really a corporate learning journey yet.
So we have large cohorts with lots of people from different companies, but then we have sub cohorts of people from one company, and we've seen exactly what you've said, where you have a group of people that are learning this new skill together, and then they come away with it at the end, and they're like, okay, how are we going to apply this new technology back to our jobs? And there's 5 of them, and they're brainstorming on how they do it, and then they go and implement it together, and it's incredibly powerful. And I do think it's a really exciting area.
Okay, thanks everybody for joining us. Please follow these incredible thought leaders on LinkedIn.